Thank you all so much for being here with us today. I am so excited to start my morning with a room full of like-minded individuals committed to the issues of boys and young men of color. I'm so glad to see so many familiar faces, so many new faces of people who are interested in this topic and interested in wanting to learn more. We started with some of the work that we did with the 2025 Network for Black Men and Boys, really pushing on the issue of making sure that African American males were achieving and doing better both in education and employment. And in recent years, we've expanded our focus through some really strategic partners in order to be able to talk more fully about the issues of boys and young men of color, because we understand that while the issues are not identical, they are similar, and that we can work in partnership to advocate together for stronger and more strategic outcomes. We've chosen specifically to work on this age group of 12 to 24-year-olds because we understand that this is a big drop-off point where we lose so many of our young men, both in terms of not achieving academically, but also in terms of not being able to get connected to the labor market. And we felt that this was an area of the work that we wanted to make sure that we were impacting. And so we're so pleased this morning that we have several partners with us to do this briefing here today. We've partnered with National Council of La Raza, with Policy Link, excuse me, with the Executive Alliance to expand opportunities for boys and young men of color, and with the Institute for Black Male Achievement. And I could not begin our day without saying thank you to the many staff and volunteers that have worked together to make this happen. All of you all that are participating today had the opportunity to talk with Keisha Bird. Keisha, just wave for folks. She is the organizer of today's event. And then so many of our CLASP staff who worked on the briefing materials that you have in your packets, who worked on communications, new staff that just joined 2 or 3 days ago, but jumped right in to be helpful as well. Our consultant, Beth Glenn, who has helped us with some of the strategy around this, and of course, our partner, Frontline Solutions, who has staff here working with us on the event and has helped us with the planning along the way. So today you are going to hear from some really dynamic individuals. We're excited that we have people from a variety of sectors and a variety of backgrounds here to talk about solutions related to boys and young men of color, particularly to their employment outcomes, their health outcomes, and their education outcomes. You're going to hear from young men themselves who are going to talk about their stories and how they have been able to advance through some very strong programming that has happened in their communities, and through the help of community leaders who have felt that it was important to tackle this issue, sometimes in the face of great opposition. You're going to hear from national leadership that have been thinking about and doing work on this issue as well. We will have question-answer periods briefly between our 2 panels, and so you'll get further instructions on how to do questions during that time. So again, thank you for joining us, and we're so glad to have you today. I'm going to invite my colleague, Catherine Singley from NCLR, to make some remarks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine Singley, and I'm a senior policy analyst with the National Council of La Raza. For those of you who don't know, NCLR is the largest national Latino civil rights and advocacy organization in the country. We're headquartered right here in DC, and we have a network of community-based groups, our affiliates, who are serving the Latino community directly. One of them is on a panel, the youth panel and the practitioner panel today, and we're so pleased to welcome Sociedad Latina. And Alex and Wilmer, thank you for making the journey. Thank you to Policy Link, the Executive Alliance, the Institute, the National Journal, who will be moderating the panels today, and especially to our friends at CLASP, Keisha, Rhonda, and the team for making this possible. NCLR is very pleased to be part of this national conversation about young men of color and the particular opportunities and challenges that exist for them. It's really hard to ignore the buzz around this topic if you live in this city, and we certainly acknowledge the importance of this discussion. culminating most recently with the president's announcement of an initiative called My Brother's Keeper. The reaction from our network, those affiliates, those community-based organizations, to the president's announcement of a focus on men and boys of color was welcome. It was also a reaction of skepticism. What is this conversation leading to? Is this really a full commitment to addressing the issues? And I think those concerns are legitimate. But first and foremost, we're really happy that we're finally talking about this in a national context, that multiple stakeholders are at the table, be it philanthropy, community leaders, young people themselves, of course, policymakers, and business. So given that context, NCLR's approach to the youth employment challenge is twofold. First, we are working to document the experience of Latino youth in particular. We're calling this population by its popular term, which is millennials. Some of you may disagree about that terminology, but we do want to describe that population from about 16 all the way up to age 30, because we really do believe that there are individual challenges and characteristics and opportunities for different subpopulations. And the second part of our approach is to craft policy and market-based solutions that really build on the assets that young people bring to the workplace. We're asking, what do Latinos have going for them? What do they offer employers and society and the community? So we're starting from a place of surplus rather than a place of deficit, and I think that's a really important framing. And starting with that question, we just published today a report examining one asset that young Latino men have in particular, and that is work experience. Young Latino men have more work experience than their peers on average, and we start asking, what does that mean? How does that benefit them in the labor market or not? We find that work experience is especially useful in boosting the employment prospects of Latino men and boys, but that as men enter their 20s and later 20s, those benefits start to diminish. When it comes to finding full-time jobs, that work experience isn't giving them the extra boost. So that leads us to other factors, structural factors, things like occupational clustering, the way people search for work, their networks, their communities, transportation, and on the employer side, how work experience is valued. What does it mean? How is it beneficial? So that's a plug for our report, which you can find outside. It's called Giving Them an Edge. But it's also an introduction to this new exploration that NCLR is undertaking with our partners to look at the experience of young men and boys, in particular Latino young men and boys. We hope that this conversation will be ongoing with policymakers and businesses and really focus on the strengths and the assets of our young men because the economy desperately needs them. Latinos are the fastest growing and the youngest segment of our workforce, and we want to make sure that they can fully leverage their potential for our economy. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome. Good morning. I hope everyone is excited to be here as much as I am. I'm Chris Brown. I'm the Director for Government Affairs at PolicyLink, and I have the privilege of sharing a little bit about our work at PolicyLink as it relates to boys and men of color, but I also have the honor to introduce a friend, Joshua Dubois, who will be delivering our keynote address this morning as we kick off a great discussion with some community leaders, some great folks doing policy work, as well as the youth, who we'll hear directly from. In some of your materials that you may have collected out front, you'll notice some of the work that PolicyLink has been engaged in around boys and men of color, but also more generally as it relates to low-income communities and communities of color as it relates to the economy. And as we all know and have been hearing so much about the shifting demographic trends in this nation, the jobs of tomorrow, the economy of tomorrow is largely based on what we do and what we decide to invest in today. By 2042, we'll be a nation that is majority of color. And so what impact does that have as it relates to boys and men of color particularly? By 2020, only 6 years from now, right, 47% of all jobs will actually require at least an associate's degree. While we all hear a lot of the other statistics as it relates to boys and men of color around fourth grade reading scores being dozens of points behind those of their white counterparts, disconnected youth above a quarter for Black and Latino students, or Black and Native American students, and 16% for Latino students or Latino youth. And so as we engage in this conversation, as we look at the research and as we talk about solutions, I would really love us to focus a little bit on what this really means, not only for our existing population today, because it's not just about the future. These boys and young men are actually here today, and what it means for our investments today, but also how it impacts our economy moving forward. The people here in this room, I really want to thank those of you who were able to make the trip from around the country, who are here locally, who are doing phenomenal work, who are championing some of these issues. PolicyLink has been engaged in several fronts on statewide coalitions as well as national coalitions, including the Institute for Black Male Achievement, which is a national coalition in partnership with Root Cause and Open Society and several others, as well as the California Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, which has been able to thankfully advance several dozen pieces of legislation in California around addressing specific needs of health, economic opportunity, education, and other issues surrounding our boys and young men of color. This represents just a slice, obviously. All of you who are in this room and the networks that you represent have been doing phenomenal work for decades. And so it is great to hear and see the national debate emerging, specifically around boys and men of color today, but we know that this fight has been going on for decades. This is not a new problem. And so we really like to highlight some of those voices today. And in particular, I would love to introduce one of those champions here, Joshua Dubois, who happens to be a great friend, who I feel as though, he sent me his bio, and I'm like, okay, I only have 5 minutes. How do I? But I figured I would best share a little bit about Joshua. You all have seen his bio in the materials. He comes formerly of the White House as the director for faith-based and neighborhood partnerships. He also leads a consulting firm called Values Partnerships that really looks at integrating cross-sectoral strategies across lines, private, public, and nonprofit sectors to really bring together solutions and for the right partnerships. We met actually on a rafting trip back in West Virginia several years back, and I have a unique experience of saying, I didn't meet him in some of these conversations or circles, but I knew he helped us get down the river, okay? And so I see him as a leader in terms of my ability to stand here before you. So it's a great honor and privilege. He's, in addition to some of the things he's working on, he's a professor at Princeton University, his alma mater, where he receives his Master of Public Administration. Again, I mentioned the consulting firm. He's been highlighted in the national media on several fronts, CNN and NewsHour, et cetera. Would love to please join me in welcoming Joshua Dubois.
Good morning, everyone. It's such an honor to be here with you this morning. Thank you, Chris, for that wonderful introduction and for not dying on that river. It was a close call, but we made it, brother. Chris is a dear friend, a policy expert who's been working on these issues for a long time. And he's also a brand new father as well. So he's pretty sleepy right now, but let's give him a round of applause. I also want to thank CLASP and PolicyLink, the National Council of La Raza, the Executive Alliance to Expand Opportunities for Boys and Men of Color, the Institute for Black Male Achievement, and all the other partners who brought us here today. Friends, it's really an honor to talk about a subject that I've been working on for years, and quite frankly, one that keeps me up at night sometimes. But for different reasons. I used to be kept up at night around this subject because I was afraid and worried and concerned for our boys and our young men and for myself. But not anymore. These days, the more I dig into this, the more I work on this, the more I come to events like this one, I find myself losing sleep, not because I'm worried, but because I'm so excited for the beautiful and bright and boundless future that I see on the horizon for our boys and men of color. And that's a phrase that's just beginning to roll off of my lips and maybe yours too. Boys and Young Men of Color, BMOCs. It even has an acronym now, just like My Brother's Keeper and evidence-based strategies and place-based interventions and all of the other phrases in the emerging lexicon of this field. But it's important to make sure that these words don't become catchphrases for us, that we don't create out of our young men avatars, instead of knowing our sons and our brothers and ourselves for who they and we really are. And who they really are is what I want to talk with you about today. And I want to begin by telling you about a time that I realized that the definition of who boys and men of color really are is much more complex, and their stories much richer than I previously assumed. You know, I never thought that the Cambodian genocide would somehow connect to My Brother's Keeper. Now bear with me for a second. I know that sounds very odd. I'll explain to you what I mean. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the genocide that occurred in Cambodia from 1974 until 1979. The Khmer Rouge regime killed almost 3 million Cambodians through mass executions and forced labor camps and starvation. And as a result of that brutality in Cambodia, droves of Cambodians fled their country and settled in the United States. In particular, a number of these Cambodians landed in an industrial, hard-nosed suburb of Boston, Massachusetts called Lynn, Massachusetts. Now, about 15 years ago, I was an undergrad at Boston University, and my dear friend, Eugene Schneeberg, who some of you know, who works on these issues at the Department of Justice, well, back then he was working with a gang intervention organization in Lynn called Straight Ahead Ministries. And I had done a lot of gang outreach myself, so I used to go with Eugene to hang out with some of the young brothers who he was working with in Lynn who were members of gangs. Now, when I first started these trips, when Eugene first invited me out, I was expecting to hang out with some tough African-American Crips or Latino Bloods. But what I saw through Eugene's work is that the toughest guys, I mean the hardest core gangbangers, the ones who unfortunately reoffended over and over again, the ones who nobody in Lynn wanted to mess with, were these little Cambodian American kids. I met a kid named Proc, and Proc is a brilliant young man. In fact, he was just accepted to seminary a couple months ago, in part because of the work Eugene and others have done with him over the last decade. But at the time, he was the hardest kid on the block. He had stabbed others and been stabbed. He had shot others and been shot. It seemed that every time I talked with Eugene, he was in court with Proc. This kid could just not get it together for some reason. And I remember asking Eugene, what is the deal? Why are Proc and his friends in the Cambodian community facing so many challenges that one would normally and unfortunately stereotypically associate with folks from other, gang members from other communities? And Eugene told me, man, you've got to understand these kids' stories. See, for Proc and others like him, in many of their households, almost every member of their extended family, other than the ones that brought them to the United States, was exterminated in the genocide. After all of that brutality that their parents had experienced at the hands of Pol Pot, when their moms and dads arrived in the United States, they had just enough left in their emotional tanks to simply get through the day, but not a whole lot beyond that. It was hard for parents to pass along lessons about empathy to their kids during the day and then have nightmares about mass graves at night. Proc and his brothers and sisters and families grew up drowning in trauma. And a few of those wayward boys unleashed that trauma on the world. It blew my mind and shattered the categories that I had created for myself. You know, I grew up in the South where almost everyone I knew at the time was either black or white or Latino. I had no framework for a 5'3" street soldier named Proc. But I saw that because Eugene knew Proc's history and his context and his story, and then he got to know Proc as a man, he could slowly and carefully and stutteringly help him through that trauma and eventually come out and thrive on the other side. That experience in Lynn and others since have taught me 3 important lessons about engaging on issues of boys and young men of color and really working with anyone who's hurting in the world, no matter who they are or where they're from, and I'd like to share them with you. First, you have to fully know their stories. Second, you have to learn to not just love them, but like them in spite of their stories, and that's an important distinction. And third, you have to give them the concrete tools to write the next chapter in their own stories instead of doing it for them. I'll spend just a few brief moments on each concept. First, you really have to know their stories. We are all walking around with the winds of history and present circumstance, either at our backs or in our faces. There's a reason why we are where we are. And for all of us, including for boys and men of color, those reasons are varied and textured and complex. I know that can be said for me. When I was 4 years old, I was in a homeless shelter, but I lived most of my life in relative middle-class comfort. My stepfather's an established minister, but my biological father passed away in a federal prison. I have PhDs in my family and drug addicts. I have with me the legacy of businessmen and teachers and activists and slaves. And it's not just me. That young man walking around with a certain amount of anger in the Inglewood neighborhood in Chicago that we hear about on the news all the time has borrowed some of that sorrow from the not too distant past. Sorrow because he's walking down streets today where he doesn't feel safe and he has to medicate himself in various ways to dull the anxiety. Sorrow from a father who couldn't break into the unions in Chicago and get a job and provide for his family. Sorrow from a grandfather who was redlined out of the best neighborhoods, and a great-grandfather who was caught up in the peonage system in the South and lynching and the other brutality of the American South. And from a great-great-grandfather who may have been a slave. Now, these are difficult, uncomfortable facts. I don't necessarily like talking about them, but they are important for us to understand and talk about and talk with our sons and our brothers about. As Ralph Ellison said one time, channeling Faulkner, our complicated racial past is a part of the living present. It's a past that speaks even when no one wills to listen. The same can be said of children of migrants who traversed a Mexican desert, or frustrated grandsons using bottles to drown their pain on a South Dakota reservation. If our programmatic interventions don't help our sons and brothers and everyone else as well understand their own story and learn and heal and grow from those stories, we'll be building our solutions on a foundation of unacknowledged trauma, just like Proc. So we've got to know their stories. And the second thing we have to do is learn to not just love them, but like these young men, sometimes in spite of their personal stories. I learned this one from Jeffrey Canada, the great founder of the Harlem Children's Zone. I called Jeff to interview him for a story I wrote for Newsweek called The Fight for Black Men. I was reaching out to him to ask specifically about what we can do about school discipline. As you know, we're facing extraordinary challenges in this space. For example, black children are 4 times as likely as their white peers to be suspended from school. And even black preschoolers, I'm talking about 4-year-olds, who make up only 18% of the preschool population, make up about half of all preschool suspensions. I mean, again, we're kicking out 4-year-olds. And if a student has been suspended from school even once by 9th grade, he or she is twice as likely to drop out of high school. So I called Jeff to ask him about this problem and ask him about solutions. And he talked with me about the Harlem Children's Zone and the work that they're doing, but he also said something else that surprised me. He said that far too many people who work with our kids and think about our kids and make policies about our kids may love them at some level, but they don't necessarily know them and like them. He said, and I'm quoting here, first you have to know them, and then you have to like them enough to respect what they're going through, but not accept responses that may be inappropriate. Jeff continued, you really do have to like them. Boys, when they're threatened and angry, they act out in ways that make them difficult to deal with. They can become sullen and disrespectful. They learn to be frightening as a defense mechanism in the environments that they have to navigate. When you don't like them, he said, those are reasons to get rid of them, to put them out of programs, to put them out of schools, to call the police to deal with them, to lock them up. But when they're kids that you actually know and actually like, they'll listen to you, and you'll listen to them. And that's where change starts. Knowing their stories, liking them, in spite of the occasional difficulty that's inherent in their stories, and then giving them the tools to write the next chapter in their own lives. This last piece is what My Brother's Keeper is all about. President Obama, who I've been honored to work with for years and learn from for years, understands the heights that a young man can reach when there are people around him committed to helping him succeed. Despite the fact that his father wasn't around and his mother was on public assistance and he faced other challenges in his life, the president, as a young man, had a lot of folks around him who believed in him and wanted him to thrive. And last year, after the aftermath of the Trayvon Martin verdict and his visits to spend some time with young men in Chicago, the president thought that we needed to do more to ensure that every other boy or young man of color in this country had the same opportunities that he had. So he created the My Brother's Keeper initiative and convened partners from across the spectrum, philanthropy and business leaders, nonprofits, faith leaders, media partners, and others, to consider how we can pour into the lives of our boys and young men. I'm honored to serve on the National Coordinating Council for this initiative that's chaired by Magic Johnson and Joe Echevarria, the CEO of Deloitte. And both the federal government and outside partners have recently released reports that provide a blueprint for this work moving forward, where specifically investments need to be made, and the tools that our boys and men of color need to succeed. We're focusing in 6 areas: early childhood education, 3rd grade reading, being college and career ready and graduating from college, successfully enrolling in college and graduating from college, being able to keep and find a job, and then avoiding interactions with the criminal justice system or reintegrating after those interactions. I encourage you to go to the White House website and check out the report in full and keep plugged into the My Brother's Keeper initiative moving forward. But I'm constantly reminded that there's no magic fix. There's no one policy that's going to heal all the wounds or solve all the problems that our boys and young men are facing. And honestly, that's okay. We don't have to solve all of their problems for them. We just have to help remove the barriers and then watch as they write the next chapter in their own story. As I close, I was at a community forum in Atlanta a couple weeks ago, and I was joined by my little brother from the Big Brothers Big Sisters program, Adid Brayboy. Adid and I have been matched for over 15 years. We met when he was 6 years old, and now he's moving into his senior year at Morehouse. And when we met, Adid's father was in jail for attempted murder of his mother, and we've grown a whole lot together in the time since. And at this community forum in Atlanta, we talked about a number of policy interventions and programs that help boys and young men. And then someone asked Adid what he thought was the most important thing we can do to support our brothers and sisters who are facing challenges. And I'll never forget his response. He said, "Help us be creative. Put a pen or a paintbrush in our hands. Teach us about music. Show us the art of architecture. Help us write a song." He said, we have these things inside of us, but no one talks about it. We are always talking about gangs and violence and criminal justice, but not about beauty and light. Help us tap into our creativity, and then we'll soar. For some reason, that just made a whole lot of sense to me. I believe Adid, and I believe the young men that we're going to hear from today. I believe the future for them is so unimaginably bright if we listen to them and understand their stories. If we learn to not just love them, but like them, even with their sometimes difficult stories. And then if we give them the tools that they need to thrive. I'm excited to commit ourselves to that national task together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for your comments. You gave us a lot to think about, a lot to mull over as we plan how we're going to engage in this work of knowing our young people and liking them and equipping them to move forward. I'm going to invite Olivia Golden to come, our executive director at CLASP, and offer a few comments. Olivia is a staunch advocate for young people and for children and for the issues that impact on people in poverty. And since taking leadership at CLASP, she has really been a supporter of our work around boys and young men of color as we have looked to elevate this population and as we have looked to disaggregate data and to lift up effective practice. So I welcome her to provide some remarks at this time.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. Can I just get a round of applause for the amazing work that Rhonda Bryant has done? And can we also say thank you to Keisha Bird for incredible work on this conference? It's such an honor for CLASP to be co-sponsoring, and it's been such a joy to have joined CLASP last August and to find leaders like Rhonda and Keisha making this work happen and driving it forward. So it's extraordinary to have the chance to be here with you. Also wonderful to follow that wonderful keynote address, which has started all kinds of thoughts rolling. I think you'll hear as I talk about my remarks. From CLASP's perspective, this is an extraordinary occasion for us because it fits so closely to our mission, which is about low-income people, reducing poverty, increasing opportunity, and it's about a racial equity perspective, understanding the barriers that people face not only because of low income, but because of race and ethnicity and other barriers to achieving their full potential. And we're also very much about solutions. Our core history has been about being grounded and practical and offering insights and ideas, and that's what today's about. So I just wanted to talk about two things quickly to lead into the panels. The first is why this issue matters so much, and the second is why the approach today of a panel of youth and a panel of people on the ground solving the problem is so exciting. I think we heard earlier in the remarks from NCLR about why this issue matters, not just as a matter of equity and fairness and decency, but for our economy, because these young people are our future. Young people of color will be a majority of children, of young people under 18, probably about in the next 3 years, according to the Census Bureau, by 2017 or 2018. So the circumstances of young people of color are not on the margins. They're not something we should care because of compassion and fairness, but we should also care because this generation is our future. And I think the other thing that was really striking to me, as you heard from Rhonda, my background is particularly thinking about children and parents. And of course, when you think about young people over the age range we're talking about, 12 or 14 or 16 up through mid to late 20s, as you get towards the middle of that range, you're also talking about young people who are parents. And so those young people being themselves able to succeed, secure emotionally, able, in Joshua's words, to pass on empathy in their own lives, that's crucial not just for their generation, but for their children. And I've tended in my work to think especially about those children's mothers as the people who are most typically raising them. But of course, when I think about that, I think I've done a lot of work in child welfare here in the district. I was the agency head of the district's child welfare agency and had many friends and colleagues who've done a lot in that field. And one of my friends worked as a mentor to a whole family of young people whose parents had been dealt with their own drug problems. And the young man she was particularly close to, I just remember her talking about his life as he entered his 20s and was struggling to be a good parent to the baby he and his girlfriend were raising. And all the demons of his past, all his experiences, his struggles in the labor market and with education, everything affecting him as he was trying to live up to what he knew he wanted to be for that baby. So if we succeed at this work, and we will, I share Joshua's optimism, it matters not only for young men, not only for our economy, but for the women who are their sisters, wives, friends, and for their children. So it's crucial work. The second thing I wanted to say briefly is why we're so excited about this approach. One of the reasons, I think, and again, you heard that in all the speakers so far, while the broader public, I think, can sometimes approach this issue with despair, we know there's a problem, but it's all very frightening and dangerous, and we don't know what to do. Those of you who've been working on this every day bring hope and joy and excitement. Young people themselves, I had the chance to talk with Angel, who'll be on the panel in a moment, and just an extraordinary level of courage and inspiration and passion as young people tell their own stories, and hope from those who do the work themselves day to day. So that's really important. If we're going to achieve change, the reaction of people hearing about it can't just be, this is terrible, and I'm sad, but I can't do anything about it. So that's one reason this approach matters. It also matters, it's a part of CLASP's whole history that we try to be grounded in the way work actually happens on the ground in communities across the country. And we try to be an organization that can provide a feedback loop, that can bring the knowledge that comes from those experiences into federal and state and local policy circles. And I know our audience today includes policymakers at all those levels. Just had a conversation with a friend and colleague who's on a congressional staff. So those of you who are speaking know that your stories are being heard by people who are listening for what are the lessons here to translate. And the last thing I want to say, and I know this will happen in the panels and in the conversations that go on afterwards, to really learn from experience and turn it into policy, you have to be open and honest, not just about the hope and the opportunity, but about the challenges. Because if you don't figure out what's hard, you never solve it. And I've been doing some work with a group of states on a different issue, on how they deliver benefits. And one of the things they always say is, we've created an atmosphere of honesty where we can talk about what's hard as well as what's easy, and that's what gets us to the next steps. So this is an extraordinary day. I'm unfortunately not able to stay for all of it, but I plan to hear about all of it afterwards and look at the materials. And I just think it's one of the most important issues and an extraordinary way of addressing those issues. But I wanted to close with a personal story. I was thinking about it anyway, and hearing Joshua's story about how he's expanded his framework for young men of color, I realized I'm probably not the only one who's been doing a lot of thinking as this issue's percolated. My parents were both immigrants. They both came to this country from abroad, and my father came himself as a baby, as a 2-year-old. But his older brother, my uncle, came at the age of 14, and he arrived in New York City in 1928, speaking no English, and in a world where there was nothing about bilingual education or responsiveness of any kind. He was a very bright young man, as my father always remembered him, and so he ended up on the streets, and he ended up dying young, making a successful life in a variety of outside-the-law pursuits, dying in his early 50s, yep. And I knew him only slightly. He was my uncle, but his life was shortened by illness during those periods. And the main part of the story that I want to tell you, though, is that my father, his whole life, felt guilty because he believed his big brother was far brighter, had far more potential than my father, who lived a very successful middle-class life as a professor and was a wonderful and brilliant man. And so when I think about that potential, when I think about that young man whose potential to contribute to the United States we lost in the 1920s and 30s, I think about the fact that maybe, almost 100 years ago it was okay. I don't really think it was okay even then, but we didn't know what we know now. But it's certainly not okay now to lose the extraordinary potential and talents of so many young people. So thank you for being here, and it's, I know, a terrific program that we've put together. Thank you.
So y'all ready to hear from some young people? Yes. So I am going to, a couple logistical things. First off, don't forget to tweet. Our hashtag is YMOCSucceed. Second, before I introduce our moderator, I'd like to tell you that we will have Q&A for both panels. The way we would like to do that is that we have index cards, and you're welcome to jot down your questions on the index cards and turn them in, and we'll make sure that the moderator receives those and can ask questions of the panels. Andrea, raise your hand so that folks can see. She'll be roaming with the index cards so that you all can receive that. And then a reminder that we are recording today's event, so it will be available for people to see the full version afterwards. So wanted to make sure that I made that announcement to folks in case you missed the sign at the front. So we're very pleased to have a terrific individual with us today to moderate our two panels. Amy Sullivan is a correspondent with the National Journal and director of the Next Economy and Next America projects. She previously served as senior editor at Time magazine, where she directed coverage of the 2008 presidential primaries and also wrote about politics, religion, and culture. So we are very happy to have Amy with us today to facilitate two really exciting panels. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. I wanted to call up our first panel of speakers today to come join me, and we'll fill these seats up here and get you some real stories of what young men have been going through and how they've been succeeding. We have a great panel of folks who have not just thought about all of these issues, but lived them. At the National Journal, one of the projects I direct is looking at the economy and the middle class and why a lot of folks have been falling out and why a lot of folks have a hard time even getting into the middle class. And again and again and again, the stories that come up are about racial gaps in achievement, in inequality of resources in schools, wealth gaps. It's not a huge mystery in terms of answering the question of why there have been a lot of economic struggles for people of color. So this really could not be more of an essential issue, not just for communities of color, but for the whole country, because when you have whole communities that are struggling economically, the entire economy struggles. And as always, we've found that the best stories are those when you can really get in and tell somebody's personal tale. And so we are so lucky today to have 4 people to tell their stories for us. I really apologize if I get the names wrong. I was asking for some help here. And we'll just let you know who's going to be on the panel. We have Brandon Deloach, is that right?
Yeah.
From Philadelphia, thank you. And Brandon, have you graduated yet, or is that imminent?
June 18th.
June 18th, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
And Brandon's going to be starting at Howard University in the fall, even better. We have Troy Dobbins from Chicago, who's going to Chicago State right now.
Yes, ma'am.
We have Angela Ortiz, who is living in Albuquerque and is a farm manager right now. And we have Wilmer Quiones, who is a student at UMass. Now, I will just preface this by saying I know how absurd it is to ask you to tell your life story in 2 minutes, but I need you to tell your life stories in 2 minutes. But just to kind of focus your stories, I want each of you to give us a sense of kind of the barriers that you initially faced in kind of your early teen years, mid-teen years, in terms of staying connected in school, maybe even in getting a job. And then just tell us your journey to the programs or the people in your community who did get you connected, and that story that you're here to share with us. And we'll start with you, Wilmer, and then move on down the line.
Sure. Well, as you guys heard, my name is Wilmer, but I would like to say my full name. My name is Wilmer Eduardo Quiñones Melos. I was born in the Dominican Republic and came here in 2004. Sorry, we're in 2014. When I first came to the United States, I was having difficulty because I did not know English. So I went back to my country, went to school for a year, and came back. And then the same year, I went to school in East Boston, and not around before I graduated, it was a hard time for me. I had lost 3 members of my family. First, it was my grandmother. Then, actually, it was 4. First, it was my grandmother. Then it was my mother. Then it was my stepfather. And then it was my uncle 2 weeks after that. And that was before I actually graduated. I had to go back, take a plane, leave my education behind, and go back to my country. When I came back, I graduated from elementary school and went to school to the McCormick. Now, it was hard for me, not only because I had lost so many people in the same year, but also because I didn't have people who I could connect to in school. I have always loved going to school and always liked to do math and stuff like that. But just because I didn't have someone that actually understand me, I didn't know English and my teacher didn't know Spanish, so it was kind of difficult for me to understand what was going on. And because of that, I ended up getting, I had to repeat the grade. And I feel like in some part, it wasn't my fault. And I spoke with my father and I transferred to another school. And thank God I found people that I could relate to, people that were coming from the same place I was coming from. And not only that, people who didn't even share part of my culture, but they seemed interested in what I have been going through. And I had the opportunity to actually get to know them by their background, their families, and things like that. And because I associated with my teachers so much, I was actually offered to go to St. Croix, an island that belongs to Puerto Rico. And that's where I actually started volunteering. I went to rebuild that Boys and Girls Club, and just to see the faces of many younger kids, to see how much they appreciated the support and the help that we actually provide for them, made me realize that I wanted to work in my community. I wanted to do something that would make a change. And so that's when I actually graduated the year after that and attended a school in Brighton, in Boston. And when I went over there, my first year, it was good, it was great, but I always spoke Spanish. I remember that I've been here for 8 years, and I started speaking Spanish in high school because I always told my teachers, it doesn't matter what you told me, I'm not gonna lose my heritage. I'm not gonna let go of my Spanish, because I know so many students who forget about where they're coming from and lose their Spanish skills, I guess. And well, I was going to school, and I had difficulty with my teachers because they see me walking down the hallway speaking Spanish, and they assume that I did not know English or understand what they were saying. So I'm that kind of student that will always raise his hand and ask for help or ask to participate in any class activity that they have. And I saw that they were kind of like avoiding me. They did not want to help me. So I transferred to a different school, and thanks to the help of Sociedad Latina, I spoke with them. I spoke with Aline de los Reyes, which was a assistant superintendent in the school department, and she said, "Hey, Wilmer, let me tell you something. You are not gonna drop out," because at the time I was thinking of dropping out. I felt like school wasn't for me. I wasn't welcome. I told them, "Hey, I'm in the point where I want to drop out. I don't want to go to school no more. I don't care. Like, people seem to not care about my success or anything." And she actually made a phone call and said, "Hey, I have this student with great potential. He's always coming to testify in school and this and this and that." So I went to the interview, and they accepted me. And that's when I actually went to grad at Eggleston and graduated from there. Thanks God. I graduated last year. And yeah, that's my school experience. I had difficulty there, but hopefully, thanks God, I graduated. And from my experience throughout working throughout Sociedad, I have 4 years working there. And even though I graduated, I still with them because I believe in the change that we are making. I started as a volunteer. I applied to work there because I was looking for a job. You know, you go to high school, you want to get a job so you could get money in your pocket. But I didn't get accepted, but I saw that they were helping you with college, they were helping you with school and everything. So I stayed there volunteering in the ELO Saturday program, which is English language learners, and help the younger kids do activities and learn English at the same time. And I thought it was really great because I didn't have the opportunity, and I wanted to be there for a student who I wanted them to have a better opportunity than I had. And I was being offered different opportunities. I was part of the ELO task force, and that ELO task force is connected to the school committee. And then I was also making a proposal to create a ELO youth advisory, and they accepted our proposal and we created the advisory. I was one of the facilitator at the moment, and I was listening to students. And the thing is that if you want to change school, you cannot change it without listening to students, because students are the ones that go to school every day. And if you want to make a change, you cannot do it without their help or support. We are the ones that face the difficulties. We are the ones that go to school every day, spend 8 hours, and school is our second home. And because of that, listening to all those stories and concerns that students have, it made it easier for me to advocate for them in that yellow task force. And that made me want to not just become a leader myself, but I wanted to help others become the leader that I was becoming. I wanted others to have the same opportunity that I have. I wanted them to not go through the same things that I went through, because I know when you have so many losses in your family, you might end up in the streets. You might do things that you might regret in the future. But if you associate yourself with a community that is there to support you, to help you, to listen to you, and not judge you for what you have done, but appreciate you for who you are and what you have to offer to the table, you might actually you might change that kid's life. You could spin it around and say, the only thing we want to hear as students is, hey, I know there's some difficulties that you are passing through, but I'm here to help you. I'm here to listen to you. Even if you might not have passed through the same things that kid's passing at the moment, but just to listen to them and tell them I'm here to support you in any way I can, that really means a lot to us. And I think that's what actually helped me, because Sociedad, I feel welcome. I feel like I always tell them, hey, this is my second house. You cannot kick me out. Sociedad closes at 8, and I was there like at 8:30, like still working on my essay paper. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Wilmer.
Yeah, no problem.
Hey, my name is Angel Ortiz. I'm going to start off by first telling you guys a little bit of who I am and where I'm from. I'm from a small rural town in northern New Mexico. It's called Peñasco. My father is Filiberto Ortiz, and my mother is Albinita Muniz. They are from the Peñasco area. I grew up in Peñasco, and there was a lot of barriers, educational-wise, race-wise. Our school is always looked down to just because we're all Hispanics. There was like 95% Hispanic. So we weren't really looked at like if we were going to go to college and go do big things. There's nothing in Peñasco. It's a really, really small town, has a lot of drugs and a lot of poverty. Excuse me. So my story is I was living in Peñasco, and I started doing drugs, and I was going downhill. I wasn't doing good at all. I have a brother that's in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he had gotten cured from albino for La Placita Institute. They do a lot of good things. They do AccuDetox, they do Sweat Lodge, they do a lot of good things in the community. I think that I'm sorry, this is my first time ever talking in front of a group. I'm sorry. So I made my way to Albuquerque, and I just left Peñasco because of all the bad things that were happening there. And my brother introduced me to Albino, and he took me in, and he saved my life, so I really want to thank you for that. The community-based programs are awesome. The programs there in the community are awesome, and I hope that there becomes more community-based programs in New Mexico, because there's nothing to do. There's no jobs in northern New Mexico. There's no money, no funding for anything. I'm the farm manager there at La Placita. We run a 2-acre farm. We have greenhouses, and we do produce all year round, organic. We help feed over 200 families there in the South Valley that are low income. And here I am. My story.
My name is Brandon Deloach. I'm 18 years old. I'm a graduating senior from Edison High School in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I was recruited by the Sankofa Passages program the spring of my freshman year of high school. This program, well, the facilitators in the program consistently came into the cafeteria Monday through Friday, presenting their in-school rite of passage program to the young men of color at Edison High School. And I remember just being in the cafeteria and seeing these guys in the hallways, passing out invitations and everything, saying, come to the workshop. We watching the Malcolm X movie, and we talking about history and culture. And I remember something that caught my attention was the Malcolm X movie. Because during like elementary and middle school, I was always taught by white America that Malcolm X was a hate teacher, that he was a hypocritical person, and that's not the person you want to follow behind. But you can follow behind Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, and this is who you're going to learn about. So I was like, okay, Malcolm X, I want to learn about Malcolm X, and I also want to see the movie too, you know? So I attended the Sankofa workshop, and I saw my two favorite actors, and that was Denzel Washington and Angela Bassett. And I was like, oh man, I got to see this movie, you know? Yeah, so now I'm tuned in, and at that time, I was out there in the streets living a life of crime. I was very accustomed to the life of crime and just, you know, having the nigger mentality, as my facilitators would say, the enslaved mindset. So, you know, I wasn't conscious that the Malcolm X movie was going to be the breakthrough for my transformation. So that summer, we went to Southampton, Virginia, to Nat Turner's land to learn about Nat Turner and stay out there for 3 days. It was sort of like a camping trip. And I got to see the cotton fields out there. And I'm like, this the same cotton fields that my ancestors picked cotton from, couldn't see at night to couldn't see at day, from sun up to sundown. And I'm like, man, this is huge right here. And it was also, that experience was also relatable to the streets. And I was like more open to wanting to know who I am as an African man here in America, and the post that I hold as an African man here in America, you know, and also just understanding that it does not matter how good of an entrepreneur you are, or rap artist, poet, athlete. If you're black in America, you are still considered as a nigger. And once I came to that clear understanding, I was like, oh man, this program is where it's at, you know. And during this time, man, it was just very reflective for me, and I was just in my observing bag, you know, just being very aware of my new surroundings with the Sankofa program. And I also was, we visit the Arthur and Schomburg Museum in New York City, in Harlem, New York City, where I was able to see the Malcolm X exhibit. And when I saw the picture and I saw his writings, it really was like inspiring to me. And I asked my facilitator, I said, hey man, we got to take a picture. You know, I got to update the people back at home the new things that I'm experiencing and learning about. So, you know, yeah, and should I go? Oh, that's about 3 minutes, right?
That's good, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Troy?
Okay. Is it still morning? Good morning, everybody. My name is Troy Dobbins, and I'm from Chicago, and I'm representing Clio right now. Just a quick overview of my life. When I was younger, I didn't really have like a big gang distraction or like a drug addiction or anything. I was extremely violent. Every day, in elementary school, I would fight. I was smart, but I would fight. And from all of my teachers, I would just get in like just mad disrespect, like, Troy, you're not gonna do well. I'm surprised you're in school. Why aren't you suspended again, right? And that was just constant for me. And then my school closed, and I had to go to school on the other side of the city. And man, I was fighting on the west side, but I was really fighting on the east side. So, it just got worse and worse until I guess it kind of escalated, and I, joined a gang. I'm not gonna disclose what gang in particular, but I was bad. I was a bad kid, and finally one of the gang leaders, kind of pulled me to the side, and was like, Troy, why you never in school? Junior, why you never in school? And I'm like, I want to be like you. I want to be around you. I want to protect you, because to an extent, that's all I really had. And he was just like, nah, you going to school. You can come hang out with us later. So I started going to school. I was still fighting, but every time I would fight, he would punish me. So it was like, all right, now I got to get to school and do what I had to do. I was smart, but like I said, I was violent. So I finally grabbed on to my next door neighbor, Tobias, and Tobias was just like, why don't you come play basketball? Why don't you come to church with me? Why don't you hang out or whatever? And I'm like, okay, right? I don't have anything else to do. So I did that, and through that, I met this guy, Tory Barrett. And Tory was just like, hey, why don't you come hang out? Hey, what are your grades? Or, this, that, and the other. And like I said, I was smart. I was an A-B student, but I was violent. So, I was really in school. So high school came. Instead of going to like a traditional school, I went to a military school for discipline or whatever. And Tory heard about that, and he was just like, okay, well, you got good grades, so, I'm going to keep you around me. Why don't you join the Youth for Christ? So I got involved in the Youth for Christ, and that was fun. I went on. Tory just kind of took me under his wing. I know I'm kind of referencing him a lot, but, it's the truth. He's like, man, you're smart. Why don't you come on this college tour? Well, Tory, I don't have the money for it. I didn't ask you for money. Come on the college tour anyway. So, I went on college tours. I went to trips. Anytime I was hungry, it was Pizza King right around the corner, or McDonald's. Then he had a kid. I'm like, oh, man, he got a kid. He's not going to show me no love no more. But then he was like, well, come babysit my kids. And, and it was just like continuous love. It was just love on top of love. And then, I got back to the neighborhood real heavy. And the gang leaders was just like, all right, Troy, I know what you're doing now. I still see you around, but, you can't hang around us unless you got a book with you, And for me, I know I kind of skipped over this, but I had a big challenge with, not dementia, dyslexia. And I was real good with numbers, but I could barely read. I have no idea how I made it through elementary school, but they didn't catch it till like my sophomore year of high school. And, it was just crazy. And I never really liked to read, and I always got around it, but I always saw Toy reading, whether it was in his office. He always had like a huge library in his house, and I was, it was new to me because my parents didn't do that. So, I started reading with Big Sweet on the corner, right? And it evolved to me reading at school. It evolved to me reading at church. And I became this avid reader, right? And it just progressed, and got bigger and bigger and bigger. And toward it started, I was getting smarter and smarter. And he just kept pushing me to continue. And then finally, ACT came around and I did okay. I told Tori what I did. He was like, "You like, that's all?" And I'm like, "Man, it's pretty good. I did better than a lot of my classmates." He's like, "Nah, go do it again." And I did it again, and I did extremely well, right? And I was getting offers from all over the world, and I had to take a sacrifice for my family because I was one of the main providers for my mom and my grandma, whatever. So I did that. Tori was kind of hurt by that because he know how much work I put into it, and he just supported me even through that. So now I work with Tori like I'm like his right foot or whatever, and that's what I do. And I just want to thank Tori and even my community for helping me get through all the challenges I faced. And I want to thank you all for even want to be participants in finding a better solution for kids like us, and it starts here. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. There's really no substitute to actually hearing what people have gone through and how you got connected, how you found those people in your life who really helped you change things. And I was struck by the fact, we're going to move to questions pretty soon, but I was struck by the fact that all of you, except for Brandon, who it sounds like Malcolm X was the kind of gateway for you into the organization you got involved with in school. But all of you had kind of one or two or even three people who really reached out and almost selected you to get connected. As you say, Troy, you didn't have a choice about it. There were people who said, we're going to make you see what you have in yourself. So I wonder if any of you have any thoughts about how important that is to have the right people in your lives, in addition to having communities and programs that you can connect with. Any of you can.
My freshman year of high school, going into my sophomore year, actually, of high school, I did had a facilitator named Brother Fawaz who was present with me during my court experiences. I was arrested for the third time, and the judge convicted me to 9 and 12 months, or it was going to be 18 and 24 months, due to the fact that it was my third strike. And my facilitator asked to speak during the trial, and the judge, let him speak. And he spoke from the heart, and it wasn't like he was just trying to find a way out just to, get me out of trouble. But he just spoke from what he understands of, from our experiences together and the things that we came to a clear understanding of. And that day, the judge made a decision to release me to my parents and give me that second chance with the Sankofa Passages program. And during that time, I was placed on house arrest, and I had to receive permission to travel and participate from the court system outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with the Sankofa Passages program. So I did have some people, too, in my corner who were more than willing to help me with this transformation,
Thanks
I
for
just
sharing.
wanted to add that there,
I'm glad you did. Troy, you had some thoughts.
I think it makes a huge difference, when you have someone from the outside, not just your family member, not just your community, that wants you to succeed. Outside of the dyslexia, I had a huge height problem. I thought I was too short. For a long time, I thought I was too skinny. For a long time, I wasn't smart enough, and it took somebody believing in me to believe that I can believe in myself, and it helped me, My mom was in my corner, I'm not going to say that she wasn't. My dad, even though he wasn't around, I could call him,
and he would lie to me, if I needed that, I had friends, I had a few teachers, but, it took somebody to really invest in me for me to believe in me. So, just that help, that outside help, that mentor, or that person that you can just go to and depend on, through thick and thin, it really does make a difference. So, yeah.
I believe that it's one of the most important things that kids should have growing up. I remember before I joined Sociedad Latina, I used to be playing baseball. I used to be hanging out in the streets, like doing things that I wasn't supposed to do. And after I joined Sociedad Latina, I had people coming from the school department, from the city council, even elected officials, like knowing me by my first name. Everywhere I went, oh, Wilmer this, oh, Wilmer that. I'm a parent. I'm a teen parent, and well, I have a daughter, and I remember I was working 2 jobs and I was going to school at the same time. My father's working 2 jobs and I barely see him, and I live with him. So I never had him in my life like I wanted him to be in there. And I remember that one day I'm working in Burger King, and I see Dr. Carol Johnson, and at the time she was the superintendent of the school department. And I see her, and she's looking at me, and she greeted me with a smile, and she said, "Hello, Wilmer, how are you doing? I did not know you work in Burger King. I come over here every Saturday to the mall, and I never seen you." I was like, "Oh, I work Saturdays and Sunday," and I didn't let her pay. I was like, "No, you know what? I'm giving you a free meal." And because every time I went, I love speaking in front of people. I love sharing my story, and I like to advocate for other students because no one did that for me. I want to do it for other kids. And after that day, it was like we built our relationship, and not only with her, I built it with staff in Sociedad Latina. I told you before that Sociedad will be closing, and I will still be in the building. It was because I did not find that connection in my house. I was looking for someone to kind of see what I was doing. When you have people that is there for you, you actually see the change that you're making, or you see how your life is evolving throughout time. And I think that's why I like doing what I do. And I want to be a police officer, but I want to make a change in my community. I want to work with non-profit organizations because I saw that change that I made after I had all those people know me by my first name, and that really means a lot to me, and it needs to be carried on for others.
Thank you. We've got some good questions here. We don't have time for all of them, but I have one here that I'd like to hear from all of you on, because you're our experts up here. And I think these folks need to hear from you. I need to hear from you. So it's, what advice do you have for adults who are working with youth to get youth motivated? Whether it's for school or for work, or just, maybe to turn around a life.
Keep the youth busy. I think that's one of the main things. In my community, there's nothing to do, well, where I'm from, there's nothing to do, so people resort to being in gangs, doing drugs, just doing stuff that they shouldn't do. And I see in other places, like, for example, the South Valley, to where they have these organizations to where there is stuff to do. People get saved, people go over there and they work, they stay busy, and they do good.
That's great advice.
Just go ahead.
All right. I'm sorry, what was the question?
It's, what advice do you have for adults who are working with youth?
Well, back home we have a campaign. It's called Learn Us to Teach Us. And I think that's really important because I had so many teachers that said, well, I had a Dominican kid last year, so I know how you learn and how you like to show what you know. I'm like, no, I have different experience. I have different, we might come from the same background, but it doesn't mean we went through the same things. So we are different. We have different personality. And I believe that one of the things that I will advise adults or teachers, mentors, or whoever it might be, it's just sit down with the students or the youth and get to know them, as our brother said earlier. Like getting to know them and liking their story, or like just sharing a part of your story, is gonna make a connection that the youth will take with them for their entire lives. And with that being said, they might even remember you. I remember some of my teachers. I still go back to my middle school and visit my teachers who did that with me, and it really means a lot to us.
Brandon?
My advice to adults that work with the youth is continue to walk in your greatness. Patience is key. My facilitators, they set the model for that example. They know that the young men of color in the Philadelphia community struggles academically, struggles with socializing and, you know, articulating their voices when it comes to something positive, or, you know, something that's beyond negative and beyond sports. You know, because our youth, they open up when it comes to sports and everything. They're very competitive. Just continue to walk with the youth in a spiritual way. Like, you know, like the brother said, if I remember his name, I see you in the crowd. You want to just remain patient with them. You gotta just like them, even if you don't love them, and also make sure that whatever they're going through that's personal, be there for them. Be there for them in their highs and lows. You know, especially when they're at their low point in their life, because it means a lot. For example, one of my stories, I was homeless at one point during my junior year of high school, and at this point, I'm at the front of the class. At the front of the class, meaning that I overcame some barriers of, you know, struggling academically, and now I'm at this point in my life where I'm confident. I'm raising my hand, asking the teacher for help, you know, and you know, just being present in the school, being present in the classroom. So that point, it just really makes you reflective and everything, you know, just having adults who are there to help you build that confidence to go in that classroom and stop the lesson if you don't understand what the teacher is saying or, you know, instructing. So I think the adults is, you know, just walk in that greatness, patience. Thank you.
Thanks.
I agree with what everybody else said, but I also think you should find a cool way to expose the youth. No, seriously, like Clio has like this scale where they balance, you know, what the youth want and what the youth need, right? So you have the open mics, you have the sports, you have the basketball courts outside, but you also have the entrepreneur workshops. You know, you have that financial literature class that you have to take, you know, things like that. So just find a cool way to expose the youth without, you know, overwhelming them and scaring them away. Yeah.
Great. I hope everybody was taking notes here. We have more questions. I have a million questions for you, but we are out of time, unfortunately. So please help me thank our panel. You guys were awesome.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I did not have a chance to meet you all before the panel, so I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves. And then what I'd like you to do is your version of the 2-minute life history, is to tell us about the programming that you're involved with and what, in your opinion, has made it effective in terms of reaching men of color and getting them connected with you and with the community in general.
Good morning. My name is Alexandra Oliver Davila, and I'm the director of Sociedad Latina, which is a small community-based organization in Roxbury, Massachusetts. And we have been in existence for 45 years. So as a man of color, I'm here to talk to you. Just kidding. Yeah, this is a personal passion of mine. So obviously, I don't have the same insights as being a man, but it is a personal passion and mission. I have been at Sociedad for 16 years. We focus on workforce development, civic engagement, arts and culture, and education, taking those next steps. We work with young people ages 10 to 21. We work with about 700 young people in that age range every year. And then we actually employ young people ages 14 to 21. We employ anywhere between 100 and 200 young people each year, depending on how much magic we can do with funding. But we are one of the largest employers in our neighborhood, and we have a waiting list of 300 youth waiting for jobs. We focus on those areas across all our programs, and I will only talk right now about the paid positions. So the paid positions, young people work as arts ambassadors, they work as youth community organizers, they work as health educators, and they also work as health career ambassadors. So I think one of the young men, Troy, talked about making it cool. I hope we make it cool. One of the things that we really have focused on over the last 16 years is attracting more young men. So we've made certain policy changes. For example, 50% of the youth that we employ have to be young men. And we have revamped our programs, listening to young people. We do a lot of evaluation every year, and one of our evaluations is a youth outcomes toolkit that is research-based that we give to young people so they can give us feedback about the program. So our programs are really coming from the young people. So we have things like a music clubhouse, visual arts, video, STEM programming, et cetera. I think the other pieces that we focus on are really, really important, which is cultural identity in terms of creating resilience in young people, making sure that they are prepared for the world of work. So all of the youth leader positions, it is a job. And then we also combine that with externships, meaning we send them out. After they've been with us for a year, they have the opportunity, and we have a lot of partnerships in our community where we're able to provide that job shadowing or internship experience, and we focus on transition. So I'll be quick, this will be the last thing. We focus on transitions. We start in middle school. So part of our programming model, although we don't work with thousands and thousands of young people each year, our model is long-term. So we work with young people anywhere from 7 to 10 years. We start in middle school. About 30% of the youth that graduate high school have been with us since 6th grade. We focus on that transition to high school, and we have a 9th grade academy because we found that that was a dropout year for a lot of young people. When we tried to get them to be in the world of work and high school, it's a lot, but they do have a transition time either in January or the next year where they become full youth leaders employed in the program. And then we focus on the college access and also just next steps, because not all of our youth want to go to college, but there are other options and other avenues, and we also work with out-of-school youth. And so we focus on the next steps, because we found over and over that there's nobody to talk to in high school about what you're going to do. And then we follow, we're really small, but we really are committed to following those young people for 2 years into college or employment, and that way we're able to make sure that they stay in school, if they're in college, that they are filling out their financial aid form, they don't get left behind, and then bringing them in as alumni. So we have youth on our board, and we hope, that they will become future philanthropists and continue the work around civic engagement that we do across the organization.
Thanks so much.
Good morning. My name is Kamau Patah, and I'm the program designer and specialist for the Sankofa Rites of Passage program in Philadelphia. We are an in-school rite of passage program that provides the education and socialization experience around the history and the culture of people of color. We primarily have a large population of students of African ancestry and Latino ancestry. And so through this in-school rite of passage program, we have taken men from the Philadelphia community and have guided them through their own particular rite of passage and prepared them to be able to go within the schools to be able to create structures that are around the educational alternatives, around cultural relevancy, as well as modeling the character, the principles, the virtues of healthy manhood. And within doing that, we have a structure where, at a minimum, the young men in the school learning community meet with the men 3 times a day. And through ritual, workshops, and authentic exposure to a wide range of experience, it helps to provide the young men with a lens and a way to view themselves outside of the context of what their learning community might have, how they might have defined them. And so our program is centered around the whole idea of transformation and growth and what that looks like within a conventional school context. And so we have what we call our transformational theory, where our young men begin to reflect on their own mentality and how they view themselves. Then that helps to influence their convictional perspective and their belief in themselves, which ultimately transforms their lifestyle. All right, and so within those 3 times of day, we open up with affirmative rituals. Then we move into what we call our manhood seminar, and then at each site generally has some type of a closing to challenge, affirm, and reflect on the healthy things that have happened during the school day. So that's part of it. And then there are times where students are pulled out of their classes to discuss certain patterns of behavior, things that are core issues that are impacting their personal and academic life. We are a part of a structure called the Sankofa 444 model. The superintendent of the Philadelphia School District had a vision of 4 healthy adults working with 44 students. And so we have provided 2 of those adults who are really geared towards the cultural, social, emotional, and identity development of the young men. And then the other 2 adults are focused around the academic. And so the marriage of that is a consistent support within the school day that reinforces the holistic development of our young men. So I'll stop there.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much.
And we've only been in existence right now. This is with our 4th year, going into our 4th year.
Oh.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Tran. I'm the California Policy and Programs Manager for the Southeast Asia Resource Action Center. That long name is broken down into an acronym called CRAC. First of all, I want to thank Policy Link and CLASP and Professor Dubois for the comments he made earlier in terms of including the Southeast Asian American narrative as part of Boys and Men of Color. One of the values that we really support and eat, sleep, and breathe on a daily basis at CRAC is the fact that politics is personal, and that's why the personal is political. So in the spirit of that value and kind of to deal with my own Asian guilt for not being able to make it home for Father's Day, I kind of want to share a narrative of my father's journey into the United States as a refugee from Vietnam. When the war broke out in Vietnam in the late 70s, my dad actually the first wave of folks that left the country were kind of the folks that had a lot of resources at their disposal, folks that were in the government. My family was definitely not part of that initial wave. In my dad's initial attempt to leave Vietnam as a refugee, he was actually captured by the Viet Cong and sent to a re-education camp where he spent a year doing hard labor and kind of going through the trauma of the brainwashing that was taking place. Eventually, my family would sell all their belongings for enough money to bail him out of the prison, and with whatever money they had left, they left the country of Vietnam as boat people. And so to give you some perspective of the refugees that left Vietnam during that time, These boats that were built to handle the capacity of about 100 people were stuffed full of people to about 400 folks in every single boat that left the shores of Vietnam. And so 1 out of every 2 boats that left the shores of Vietnam never made it to a destination. And in total, somewhere between 200 to 400,000 people perished as a result of trying to leave the country. I am one of the privileged few that have been able to enjoy the opportunities that the sacrifices of my family were able to give me. Part of why I'm telling you this narrative is because, unfortunately, the discussion of boys and men of color, this narrative is oftentimes not spoken about when we talk about Asian Americans as it relates to other communities of color. Oftentimes, Asian Americans are kind of looked as the model minority, folks that are really excellent at math, but at the end of the day don't have the same types of struggles in the communities that other Latino, African American, and Latino men experience. And unfortunately, this reality does play out when it comes to public policy. And hopefully this doesn't get me in trouble with the folks in California, because I have a lot of California love. But when the California State Legislature first set up their select committee on boys and men of color, there wasn't a single Asian American legislator on the select committee to focus on issues dealing with boys and men of color. And this also translates into the distribution of resources, whether it's on a statewide governmental level or when it comes to foundations and looking at the disparities within the Asian American community. Unfortunately, there is a reality when it comes to issues that young boys and men of color face within the Southeast Asian American community. For example, within the Cambodian American community in California, over 60% of the male population has something less than a high school diploma. And when it comes to incarceration, I can't even give you statistics about our populations because oftentimes the category of Asian Americans is created as a lump sum, and I can't provide you more disaggregated, more detailed information about that population. What we do know, for example, in Sacramento City Unified, is that when it comes to suspension and expulsions that disproportionately affect Latino and African American men, if you look at the Asian American demographic and if you disaggregate it, a vast majority, over 2/3 of the Asian American students that are suspended and are expelled in Sacramento City Unified are Southeast Asian American young men. And oftentimes those individuals are repeat victims of suspensions and expulsions, which translates to the fact that there are not enough support systems or interventions or parent engagement type of programs that work with these populations. I want to end with the kind of a positive note. We at CRAC are working in collaboration with community-based organizations on the ground that are instrumental in the healing process for a lot of these young men and the trauma that they face as second-generation refugees. But what we at CRAC are doing is we formed the Southeast Asian Young Men's Collaborative and working with community groups all throughout California to really engage young men in the dialogue of boys and men of color, but also empower them to be active participants in creating the solutions, giving them the tangible skill sets to really create systems change that not only heal them as individuals, but also push and challenge the institutions that create the conditions that they're in. And so with that, I look forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Tiawit. Tlaso kamati siwat lampad, mik lampad, tiawis lampad, wits lampad. Ipal na moani totatsi, tonansi. Tekpat kiawi, kalimalinali, kalsochin. Tochli kuskakwauli. I'm the rabbit and the condor. My name is Albino. I'm the executive director of La Placita Institute. Walawise Chichimeca, Lepan Apache, otherwise Chicano. Really honored to be here. Honored to have had the opportunity to bring Angel with me today. And I come from today Albuquerque, New Mexico, the South Valley of Albuquerque. In New Mexico, we have 22 reservations. Last year, my organization served over 52 tribal affiliations in the country that reside in Albuquerque or around Albuquerque. We live in the zip code 87105 and 87121, which is known as the South Valley of Albuquerque, which has the highest rate of incarcerated youth of color in the state of New Mexico. It also has the highest rate of adjudicated youth of color in New Mexico, and the highest rate of dedicated probation officers to any particular zip code in the state of New Mexico. We have the highest rate of incarcerated mothers and fathers as well, and adjudicated, which means that we have the highest rate of returning citizens from incarceration, jail, prison, probation, etc. So there's opportunity for us there. We're a certified organic farm registered with the New Mexico Commodity Commission. Right now we have a collaboration and a network of barrio farmers and gardeners that 4 years ago didn't have a seed in the ground. Today we have 17 pieces of property in the South Valley that now serve, as Angel mentioned, 200 families a week with certified organic food coming directly from the barrio. This food is prepared weekly, and a big bulk of it comes from our particular garden program because we have one of the largest producers, and Angel is managing that. We talk about opportunities. We have a silkscreen shop, T-shirts. We're trying to be self-sustainable. We're grassroots. I'm a surrogate father, surrogate uncle, surrogate brother, surrogate grandfather, some of them. Many of them come whose parents and families are incarcerated. And we become that surrogate family in my organization. I'm a BTDT. I've been there, done that. So, you know, I'm not just a hair club president. I'm a member. I'm a graduate of the University of Hard Knocks, top of my class, master's in streetology, and a PhD in bodyology. It's a little play on things that we say, but the bottom line is we use every resource in the community. Today I have over 50 years of incarceration on my staff. Men and women, boys and girls come out of jail or detention or probation, and the first direction we put them in is college or school. A man coming out of prison can go apply right down the street at Central New Mexico Community College, and we will sit there and fill out the financial aid. And if they qualify, which all of them do when they're coming out of prison, then they qualify for work study. La Placita is the only organization that we know of in my city, maybe the state, who hires ex-felons. So we have a steady workforce coming through our organization who come from the neighborhood, who are working and living the change that we want to see. They're most dedicated, most passionate, and most experienced with the population that we're trying to serve. There are many other things that we work on. We have sweat lodge ceremonies, as mentioned. We have a curandero house, traditional Mexican healing, because we're transnational and indigenous identity. We believe in our history, our culture. The language I spoke has been spoken on this continent for not hundreds, but thousands of years. Those are my roots. We provide that to our people today. Take them back home, further than all the identities that were placed upon us by contemporary society, nationalism, etc. Again, I appreciate being here. We'll share more later. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good morning. My name is Tori Barrett. I'm the founder and executive director of an organization called CLEO, K-L-E-O. It's an acronym that stands for Keep Loving Each Other, and I'm honored to share the panel with these distinguished individuals. I started the organization in 2008. I had a baby sister. Her name was Cleo. She was 27 years old. She was a deputy sheriff for Cook County Correctional Facility, and she used to take groups of young African-American men to the juvenile detention center so that they can see what their life would end up if they didn't get on the right track. When she was engaged to be married and had an ex-boyfriend who had lost a mother, she went by to check on him, and he ended up taking her life and took his own. And so when that happened, for me, I was in real estate development, and because of the passion that she had with working with young men of color, I had two choices. I could either go off and retaliate like a lot of young men do today. Something happens to their family member, they take somebody else's family member. Or I could go on and create a legacy in my sister's name, and so that's how the organization was started. When I first started the organization, we had a focus of eradicating domestic violence. But then as growing up on the south side of Chicago and being in the trenches, domestic violence is one type of violence, but there's other violence that needs to be solved as well. And so we expanded our mission, and now we have 4 areas of focus: education, economic development, health and human services, and public safety. We run about 11 different programs. We started in 2008. We have a budget just over $2 million, but the 2 programs that I'll talk about today are our in-school program, which is the violence-free zone. And so what we do is CPS call CLEO and tell us when they have a school that is out of control, one that is on the verge of closing. And so they'll ask us to come in and run our program. And so what we do is we go into the school and we identify the 10% of the student population that's causing 100% of the problem. A lot of times you think that the entire school is bad, but it's really just a small group of individuals that's causing all of the problems. And we identify those students by principals, teachers, and then by other students. And we work with that 10% in an intensive 24/7 counseling in order to change their mindset. And if you change their mindset, you end up changing the entire school. And so we have a long-standing relationship with Chicago Public School System, and that's the intensive mentoring program that we run there. The other one is called the Second Chance program. When Mayor Emanuel came into office, he started working with community-based organizations to figure out the violence in Chicago. I know you all have seen it on CNN. You've seen it all over the place, that the violence is out of control. And so I had a chance to sit with him, and I encouraged him to look at adolescents, look at youth who are juveniles and who are coming out the juvenile system, because as they get older, they're the ones, once they get 24, 25, 26, are causing the majority of the problem. And so we have a program where we target 1,200 minority males, Latinos, and African American, and we hire, train, and place them at work sites throughout the city to gain work experience. These are all ex-offenders coming directly from the Juvenile Detention Center. We also partner with the Becoming a Man project so that they can provide the social and learning behavior therapy for this group of individuals. We started the program in 2011, and the first year that we ran the program, we reduced the recidivism rate of these individuals by 51%. Once that happened, the University of Chicago Crime Lab started doing the evaluation of the program, and now we've expanded from 1,200 to 22,000. And so citywide, we have a summer jobs program with 22,000 young people. 75% are minority males who have juvenile records, and we are working with that population so that at the end of the summer, they have work experience. 50% of the people who they're placed at their site end up hiring the youth, and then in addition to that, we make sure that they continue their education. And so that's that's the bread and butter of CLEO, that program there, because like Troy said, one of the things that we try to do and make sure to engage the youth is that if you create a program, tell the youth to come to the program, but they didn't have input in creating that program, you're not going to get the attendance and the participation that you need. And so we work with the youth to create the programs, and then that keeps them inside the center. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It sounds like a cliche, but I mean it genuinely, that it's inspiring to hear about the work that each of you is doing with your organizations and in your communities. And the question that I really have for all of you is, what do you need to make your lives easier or your work easier? And by that, I guess I mean either, is there something at a policy level that could support your work, make it easier for you to reach more kids? Or are there things that you see that could be done to make the nature of your work easier, so that affect the young men before they even get to the point where they're connected with you? And any of you can jump in here.
I'll say, at a policy level, I think what would assist us is less policy. To a certain degree, there's policies set up against our people. And these policies disable my folks from being able to engage or interface with society in an educational and a healing and a mentorship way. There are laws that prevent many of those that work with me to serve our families, to serve our children, serve our community. These policies need to be undone. There are certain criteria, education, academia, etc., licensure, that prohibit us from, serving our people. Not really. We do what we do regardless. But, formally, institutions, organizations are not able. We have policies against people who don't possess social security numbers, etc. I never attended one day of college. I'm the executive director. I'm a Kellogg National Leadership Fellow. I've traveled to 16 countries and more. I serve my community. I encourage my people to go to school, get to college, because as you mentioned, I heard earlier, one of you talked about it takes an associate degree or more now to be successful in our national society. Anyway, those kinds of policies are good, but when they prevent or prohibit a population who don't possess those kinds of credentials and licenses and even outlaws it, they hurt us. So those are just a few things, that would enable us, I think, to work with our people without fear and without repercussion.
I'll say two things. One, in Illinois, a law just passed where any juvenile passed is automatically expunged, as long as it's not a felony. And that is huge. It's made a huge difference for young people in Illinois. Now, when they're filling out their application, they've made a mistake as a young man, young woman, they no longer have to check, I've been arrested. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I think, we do it in Chicago, but I think on a national level, if there's a way to create, like we have the workforce development program, we hire, train, place them at work sites throughout the city. We have young men and women who are aspiring to be rap artists. But what if we can place them at radio stations and they can learn how to be the engineers behind the music? now that expands their opportunity. And I think it needs to be on a national level because you have different cities doing different things, but on a national level, if everybody got together and said, we're going to, do summer jobs, but at the same time, place these individuals in areas where they can gain experience, then now they can broaden their scope. Yes, maybe I want to be a rap artist, but pushing a button and being an engineer will give me a good job as well. So I think on a national level, if we can come together and do things like that, it would be key.
I think I had two as well. The first one, and something that always comes up within the Asian American community, is a need for disaggregated data across the board. When it comes to being able to understand the community in depth, understanding the differences in immigration patterns, and understanding some of the challenges that are unique to each ethnic group, and being able to create public policy that are effective and efficient, because that's what everyone talks about, right? Let's make government efficient. But if you don't know where to invest your resources, you can't make government efficient. So I think first and foremost is making sure that we disaggregate data across the board in education, in workforce development, in public safety. The other element I think is to highlight would be oftentimes this conversation about the school to prison pipeline, but something unique to the Latino and oftentimes the Asian American community is the school to prison to deportation pipeline that exists for a lot of community members. Because of the 1996 immigration reform, individuals that are legally permanent residents here in the United States that came over, you probably as young children or as babies, with their parents as refugees, now currently have orders of removal as a byproduct of being caught within the criminal justice system. Under the existing law, it gives folks zero opportunities for judicial review, gives them zero opportunities to show that they've reformed their lives and are now contributing to society. So I think breaking that chain between the school to prison to deportation pipeline is one of those opportunities that we can really change policy on.
I think also we need to look at some of the alternatives to the punitive modalities within schools. More times than not, the young person who's most disenfranchised and neediest is those who are punished the most. And if we begin to look at some more transformational concepts and practices, as well as some modalities that come from some of the indigenous cultures in terms of mediation, in terms of making some of these young people go through some transformational experiences, as opposed to just a straight discipline where the core of the issue is not ever addressed, but this repetition around being excluded from school for long periods of time. We need to look at some policies and practices around that. And I would also say that, as employment is always a challenge, and the competition around summer youth employment becomes so much, emphasis is around that. We really need to look at some long-term, year-round employment opportunities for young people.
I would just add again to the investment around youth employment. We, as an organization, use summer monies in order to actually be able to hire during the year. So during the summer, we do not spend any funding, and then we use that during the year. But there just needs to be a greater investment. I think everybody in this room knows that young people who actually have jobs have a greater likelihood of graduating from high school. It's not rocket science. I think the other thing, as small community-based organizations, we need to have more flexible funding. We need to have long-term funding so that each year we do not have to prove our case and be the, flavor of the month piece, which brings me to, another issue around, this topic, making sure that, I think somebody mentioned that the policies that are created usually are created without those that they're being targeted towards. And so really listening to youth voice to make sure that whatever policies are being put in place are not actually holding young people back. Like the workforce development dollars from Jobs and Community Service, EDIC, an example, I know it's across the country, but I don't know what's called in each state. But in our state, you know, those jobs are supposed to be targeted to young people that are out of school, that have all of these barriers, and yet we make them come and fill out all this ridiculous paperwork. Like if they're homeless, they have to somehow prove that they're homeless. So how does that actually help a community-based organization? We have to spend all that time trying to figure out how to get that piece of paper that says you're homeless when you're homeless, and you know, to give that to the agency. It's a barrier for young people. I think the other thing is to expand job training. So we really need to look at what are the fields that actually are related to cultural competency and cultural proficiency. Like, for example, we need more medical translators that speak other languages. So really taking a hard look at that. And then also another point is, in terms of school systems and policies, we have a huge gap in in teachers and administrators do not reflect the young people in our school systems. And we can't pretend that, you know, if you didn't grow up in a certain situation, that you're gonna be able to relate and know. It might be scary, and we can't blame teachers, but teachers need training, and I think on a national level, we really need to push for certification that includes cultural proficiency training and gender training for teachers so that they don't feel scared, and actually includes an internship component where they actually go and get that experience in that setting. And I know in Boston, we just started this past year, we've been talking forever, but this year we just started this pipeline, a teacher pipeline. So we're recruiting 9th graders to be with us for 8 years as, you know, the school with other community-based organizations, and specifically recruiting young people of color to be in some of the, you know, the fields like STEM, et cetera, that we want to have a more reflective population of teachers and administrators. So why not start from within, you know, the school and recruit those young people? They actually stay for 8 years because they get a scholarship, almost a full scholarship, so they have to pay a little. We have some universities are invested, and then the point is for them to come back and to teach within the school. But there's, you know, things that I think need to be pushed nationally.
Thank you. We have time for about one question. So it's actually useful that a number of these questions are all around the same area. And that's for those of you who are a part of school-based programs or whose programs coordinate with schools. We're all wondering how you effectively partner with school administrations and with faculty who might be resistant to or maybe even threatened by your efforts.
That's only a 1-minute question. I know we partner with a lot of schools. I think it's really, it might not be the same for everybody on this panel. We do a good job, but it's really, really challenging. At least in Boston, every school has its own little fiefdom. You're either in or you're out. It's based on relationships. I think there needs to be something on a district level that really coordinates the partnerships, and so that it's not, you know, a little exclusive club where who you know and how you get in. It is challenging, but when it works really well. So I mean, we do have some really great partnerships where the principal and the administrators and teachers understand that we're in this together, that we have the same goals in mind, and to be able to have, you know, be there during the school day, and then for the young people to come after school to our program. I mean, it only just makes sense, but I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
We haven't experienced we haven't had experience that represent the answer, but we're in 7 different schools, and we've had some varying success. And part of that success is when a school administration embraces the program and has an understanding of our mission to a point where they have thought from an educational lens how to integrate the program effectively. So where that happens, then it becomes a part of the school's culture, it becomes a part of the school system, it becomes a part of the school's practice. Everybody in the school community can articulate what the program's mission is and the practice and how it's a part of that learning community. And on the other end of it, on the other spectrum, you're just seen as an entity within a school that sometimes interrupts instruction. And so again, it's really having the dialogue with the administrator and the school leadership team that represents the school as well as the surrounding community to provide clarity and give them the opportunity to embrace and accept the program. And in doing that, it allows us to be able to really go in and perform the service that in an authentic way.
And I would say two things. One, get headquarters to help you get an introduction into the school. But then two, you run the program so successfully where the school can't function without your program. We are at a school called Paul Robeson in Inglewood. This school had low attendance, high disruption, and behavior problems. We came in and brought our Friday Night Live, which our open mic night, into the school. On Wednesday, they have half a day. So now once a month, we have what's called Get Live Wednesday, where there's an auditorium of 300 seats, and the bad students who they said could not turn it around, we work with them after school to perfect their talent, and now they put on a showcase for the entire school on every third Wednesday. And so what happened was these same students, now that the school is jumping on Get Live Wednesday, they get a belt that calls them the champ of the school for the month. Mm-hmm. And so these students who were not coming to school, disrupting class, they are now have the highest attendance because we said in order to participate in the show, you can't miss school this month. If you miss school, you can't participate in the show. So we have the high attendance on those students who are participating, and then the school is 1,100 students, and only 300 can get in. And so now the people who have the best attendance, least class disruption, they're the ones who get a ticket to come to the show. So when you do things like that, the school, they started busing in the grammar school students because they had low enrollment. So they started bringing in the parents and the grammar school students to come in and see the show to help increase their enrollment. So when you come up with creative solutions like that, where the school says, okay, I can't function without your program, then you really have that inclusiveness. We have a room inside the school. Instead of sending the students home, suspending the children, they send them to us. And we work with them inside that classroom, and then they go back to class. And so when you do creative things like that, you're able to get the buy-in from the school.
We had the highest rate 3 years ago of school to detention referrals in my zip code, which houses the highest populated school in the state of New Mexico. And it's very open with the fact that this was a fact. Challenge was, the first challenge posed by the system was that they said they didn't have the resources to give us any help to come in. So we said we would do it for free. Second, they said, the liability is rather high. Third, they said there's not enough space to conduct your program here. Fourth, we need all you guys to do background investigations to walk on campus. And we overcame each and every one of those things. And we haven't received a cent. And that, I can't tell you how many millions their annual budget is. And they have professional therapists and clinical agencies doing the work. But when we got in there, right, and we did everything for free, and we got all the leadership, all the street leadership, all the gang members, from the rival, gangs in the city, who were at that school, who were the first ones to get put in the car straight to detention. Today, our zip code no longer has the highest rate of school to detention referrals. Matter of fact, that high school has the least amount of school to detention referrals. And part of it was through our collaboration with JDAI, Juvenile Detention's Alternative Initiative, work with the system, the probation officers, the court judges, but primarily because we overcame all the obstacles and barriers, and we offer our services for free, and it's funded through any other way we can do it. And most of all, it's funded by our heart.
actually bring good news from California. So we actually, in the last week, have had 2 huge victories in some of the local districts in California, both in Long Beach and Sacramento, 2 of the most diverse school districts in the entire country in regards to just the makeup of Latino, African American, and Asian American students. Each of these unified school districts have adopted either resolutions for restorative justice models of school discipline with the ultimate goal of eliminating suspensions and expulsions altogether. So both of these school districts have adopted resolutions. Sacramento is actually having specific line items in their budget for that very purpose of investing in restorative justice type programs. 3 lessons from this experience in both of these districts. The first is that in both of those instances, youth are at the forefront of advocating for their interests, right? So a huge priority is making sure that the young people that are being impacted by these policies are at the forefront of advocating for changing these types of policies, and that the youth themselves have the tools to understand the complicated policy matters that affect their lives. And so in each of these circumstances, they're the spokespeople. They're in front of the cameras during the press conferences, and they're the ones making the policy ask at the end of the day. The second thing we learned was that you need to engage all stakeholders in that process. I think there was a big decision that was ruled yesterday in California regarding teacher tenureship. But one of the main stakeholders that we really prioritize in each of these areas was to really engage each of the teachers' associations in both Long Beach and Sacramento. They become our strongest allies because at the end of the day, their priority is taking care of their kids and making sure that their classrooms do well. And if they're spending their time investing a lot of their energy into these types of school discipline policies and not being invested in with and given the resources to be able to adjust and adopt a more restorative justice model, they fall behind. And so they were actually some of our main champions. So engage those individuals early. And the other is really understand the political landscape coming into it. I think a lot of times folks say that there's not enough money within education and we have to do stuff for free. But the reality is that there are actually a lot of resources that are dedicated to education. In California, over 40% of our state budget is dedicated specifically for education. At the end of the day, yes, it's not enough, but the reality is that there's resources being allocated to programs every single day. But a lot of times those programs get siphoned off into consultants, siphoned up into private programs, but not really invested on the school sites themselves. So really understanding the political landscape in each of those examples in Long Beach and in Sacramento were essential to making sure that we move our policy priorities forward.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, in wrapping this up, I am going to take a little moderator's privilege. Everybody's been talking about their dads today, and it's Father's Day coming up, so I want to brag on my dad for just a minute, who turned 70 this weekend. So my dad started his career in education teaching for 30 years high school in Detroit, where he is, like me, the whitest of the Irish American Caucasians, but managed to be very closely involved with the lives of so many of his students. I can't tell you how many evenings he spent in Detroit sitting down with one of his kids, filling out financial aid forms, filling out college applications, walking them through the process of how you go on an interview for a scholarship, bringing kids winter coats when he knew that they didn't have them in their homes. After that, he moved on to the relatively easy job of doing discipline in middle school, which I think people deserve sainthood for doing. A number of you have mentioned the issue of discipline and how key that can be in either making or breaking a kid's life. And one of the things I really valued about the work my dad has done is that he tried always to strike that balance between making sure his school was safe, but also making sure that working with those kids wasn't going to put them on a path that they couldn't get back off of. And even now in his retirement, I tell him, Dad, you can sleep in now. You're not working. He's getting up at 6 a.m. many days to drive CJ, this 13-year-old, whose family moved in from Detroit because everybody's fleeing the Detroit school system, driving CJ to tutoring early in school because the buses don't take kids early, and the only way he can get there is if my dad comes and picks him up and takes him. And I say this because I'm proud of my dad. He's going to have some of his students there on Saturday for his 70th birthday party because, as Wilmer was saying, they remember Mr. Sullivan, and they're still in touch with him because he's been that special person. But I also know how hard it is, and I know what special people you have to be that involved in the lives of kids who don't always make it easy. So I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and I know we all thank you and hope that you're able to have the strength and the resources to continue for a long time.
Thank you. I know I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch, so I'll just take about an hour. Is that okay? No. So thank you for bringing me here today. Congratulations to Policy Link and the National Council of La Raza, and of course CLASP, and especially Keisha for bringing me together. I got to know Keisha when we were together at the Philadelphia Foundation. So first of all, thank you for all the nonprofits who took time away to come from your cities here and brief us all on these important issues. Congratulations to La Sociedad Latina, La Placita, CIRAC, Sankofa, and CLEO. And of course, thank you to Angel, Wilmer, Troy, and Brandon for sharing with us your stories and wrapping it all up in 2 minutes each. So I just want to close up in 5 minutes by reflecting on two groups that I want to talk to. First of all, and that is the nonprofits who serve the boys and young men that we've heard today. So whether your strategies are for applied research, or secondly, whether you use that applied research to advocate or harass policymakers or funders, or thirdly, as we just heard from the third panel, whether the nonprofit does not do research or advocacy, but you engage in direct services, continue to do the great work that you do, but do it in, as we heard today, do it in a creative, wacky, crazy, innovative stuff to keep our people busy. So you've heard some interesting strategies that our nonprofits are using sweat lodges, watching movies and reflecting on the movies to see what we can learn from them, taking our young men to site visits where ancestors worked, introducing our young men to different industries, collaborating with school districts. So do these innovative things because hopefully what is called innovative today will tomorrow be standard, and you're setting the stage. And my second suggestion, and again based on what I've heard today, is the nonprofits, you need to continue to listen to our young men who you're serving and ask them to see if what you're doing is having an impact and changing their lives. Because if so, and this is a simple word for what the funders call evaluation metrics, because if so, what today you are calling evidence-informed can tomorrow be called evidence-based. And we can copy and paste it, whatever you do, the sweat lodges, the movies, the site visits, we can replicate in Miami, Chicago, San Diego, and El Paso. So thank you again, organizations, for mentoring and making sure that our young men thrive. My second and final remark is to funders, be you private funders, family foundations, corporate foundations, community foundations, or whether you be public sector funders, Department of Health, Department of Education. You have a critical role in making sure that the nonprofits that are mentoring our young men keep their doors open and keep doing their crazy, innovative, wacky things. So thank you for continuing to support them. We didn't have any funders panel, but in my travels around the country and in making site visits and listening to funders and nonprofits, one thing we've heard is that funders who do this make really great grants. So number one is recruit and nominate on your boards or advisory boards people who come from the community, and in the context of this morning, are men of color who know what's going on, so that those board members or advisory board members, when they're reading the proposals, they say this is crap or this is good, because they've lived it. Funders, be you private or public, hire program officers who also come from the communities. So when they receive the proposals for funding from nonprofits, they too can cut through the crap because they've lived it and they are from the community. And lastly, funders love to tell nonprofits to collaborate, to have collective impact, the last word. So our suggestion to funders is to practice what you preach and also collaborate with other funders so that your $500,000 together with their $50,000 together with their $100,000, whatever, you're having a collective impact. You have more money in the kitty, and out the door can go larger amounts for multi-year to support the nonprofits, which are in turn supporting Brandon, Wilmer, Troy, and Angel. And lastly, and now we can all go to lunch or take our trains or take our planes, to the young men, you guys, thank you for telling your stories. Whatever the challenges you may have faced because of immigration status, abilities or dyslexia, disabilities, or your gender or your sexual orientation, you've succeeded and you will continue to succeed, and we believe in you guys. To quote the words of a famous philosopher, Whitney Houston, children are our future. And to wrap up to how we began around 10 a.m. with the words of another philosopher, Joshua Du Bois, no, Troy, Brandon, Wilmer, and Angel, we're listening to you. We not only love you, but we like you. And hopefully we'll give you the tools and we'll support you with the tools, the sweat lodges, the films, the site visits, to give you the supports, the tools, to make sure that you continue to succeed. We're watching you, and we're going to make sure that you make it and that you do great, great things. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you to everyone for being with us today. Hopefully, you received a lot of new information, a lot of inspiration to go forward doing your work. All of the materials that are in your packets are also available online on the CLASP website. Thank you again to all of our partners who made today possible and all of the staff who supported getting this event off the ground. And with that, I'll tell you, like my pastor says, depart to serve.